This afternoon we're talking to author Kara Gnodde, whose debut novel, The Theory of Not Quite Everything, is coming out with Ham Macmillan on the 16th of March. She's in conversation with her mentor from Blue Pencil Agency, Sara Sarre. Welcome, Kara and Sarah. The Theory of Not Quite Everything explores sibling relationships, maths, and whether there could really be an algorithm for love. Kara, where did you get the initial inspiration for the novel?
Inspiration, it's such a funny thing, isn't it? We listen to stories from authors that we know and love and their inspiration stories, and it always seems so definitive. They seem so certain about where their inspiration came from. And it definitely wasn't like that for me. I think I felt like I was probably swimming along in a school of fish and grabbed one by the tail, and I had no idea until quite far down the line that I'd grabbed my whale, that this was going to be my novel. But looking back on it, I can say with quite a lot of certainty what the moments of inspiration actually were. And the first was that I'd just finished a course on brain and behaviour, and I'd learned about this thing, a psychological questionnaire that had an inbuilt lie detector. How you fill out the certain questions can tell the person who's assessing the questionnaire how much you lied in it. And then a little while later, I was driving along listening to In Our Time with Melvin Bragg and his guests, and they were talking about a maths problem that could genuinely, fundamentally change the world if solved, called P versus NP. And I knew straight away that this was the thing that art would be absolutely obsessed by. It was difficult enough, practically impossible, intransigent enough, rabbit warren-y enough, touched so many parts of life. And then the third thing, which relates to the sibling relationships in the book, listening to Sigrid Rasing talking about her relationship with her brother, or her relationship with the rest of the family. She had a brother who was an addict, and she spoke very movingly about being the other child in the family, so the one that wasn't demanding all the attention. And I thought that was a very interesting dynamic to think about. The child who isn't sick, the child who isn't the genius, the child who isn't the addict, the child who isn't sucking up all the oxygen in the family.
Kara, before you did mentoring, you'd completed a number of writing courses. Could you talk a little bit about those?
The first course I did was an online course in New York called the Gotham Writers Workshop. And I chose it because it was very far away and felt completely anonymous, which I loved. I was quite shy about saying that I wanted to start writing, and that took me a while to get over. So that was the first benefit. And then the second benefit was very quickly how much I loved it. I realized that I really had found the thing that I loved to do. So that was fantastic. The third thing was that they taught me the fundamentals. You may disagree with that, Sarah. you may not feel they taught me anything at all, but they did go through the absolute basics of point of view, settings, etc., etc.
No, you were well versed. You knew
dialogue, all those basics. But the most important thing by far is that you learn to take feedback. And on the online courses, because they're anonymous, I think the feedback is even more brutal. So you get very robust feedback right from the beginning, and you learn to detect which feedback you should be listening to and which you should discard. And that is a muscle in a way that you need to learn to listen to. It's a muscle that needs practice. When you get the right feedback, it resonates in a way that is almost like you recognize it, like you knew what was wrong with your work. And then I went on to do an in-person course with Faber, which was completely different and absolutely wonderful. I used to get on my bike and ride to Bloomsbury and feel like a writer, and that was fantastic. That was the first time I really felt like I was actually a writer and felt like I could say it out loud, that it was legitimate. And I met these lovely other writers who were all really gorgeous people from all over the place, all doing very different things with their lives, but in this small room once a week, all doing the same thing and all wanting the same thing.
Kara, when is a good time to start working with a mentor?
Interesting question. I think that you have to be ready to start working with a mentor because it's a very big commitment. I feel like I was ready to have that very constructive feedback relationship with you by the time I got to you.
Yeah.
Would you agree?
Yes, I think so. I think at that one stage it was quite forensic, wasn't it? We were really going in deeply, and you were ready for that, for sure.
How was Kara's novel different at the start of the mentorship?
Well, when I first read Kara's novel, I could see these fabulous characters and huge depth, and the prose was wonderful, but it felt like it was like all these kind of words that were, think I said to you, it was like a bag of kittens, a litter of kittens had got inside and tangled it.
What I remember is you said to me, it was, you could see the skeleton of a novel, but somebody had taken all the bones and thrown them into the back of the truck. That's what I remember.
I remember being quite harsh.
You weren't harsh, I think you were just honest, and that was okay. I could take that. I liked your directness always.
It wasn't that different. The bones were there, but we kind of fleshed it out, didn't we? We worked together on it to give it structure, really. It was the structure that needed.
My novel had taken a slightly wrong direction,
Yes.
and we had to unearth the core story, and you helped me unpick what the actual story underneath it all was.
Yeah.
We spent quite a lot of time doing that.
Yeah. No, I think that's if you want to know what an editor does, they pull the story out of the writer.
Well, that you did.
Gently do.
Absolutely. And sometimes not so gently.
How did the editor-author relationship work for you, and what actually happens in your mentoring sessions with Sarah?
So the first session that I ever had with Sarah was after she read the first book, and she was giving me, you gave me that editorial feedback with the kittens or the skeleton. And that was a straightforward sort of editorial feedback thing. And we met, we had a cup of coffee, and I think the important thing was we knew that we liked one another and that we could happily work together for quite a long time. We either met and workshopped a piece of the manuscript, or we met over Zoom. We did quite a lot over Zoom. The interesting thing for me, the difference between a straight editor, which is how we started, and what became a mentorship, was that editorial feedback is very text related. You focus on a particular bit of the text, be it a one page or even chapters and chapters. Whereas the mentorship, first you go to sort of 1,000-foot view, where you talk about a piece, you go over a piece, but within the context of the whole book. And so you have this constant context of the whole novel and how any piece fits into the structure of the novel, which is what I needed lots of help with. The story, which bit actually relates to the genuine story you're trying to unearth. And then there's the 10,000-foot view, which is your writing in general. And Sarah was brilliant at that. There were quite a few, so there were some technical things that she taught me that were very specific to this novel, like the close third person, unreliable narrator. But then there were other things that were principles that Sarah taught me. The thing I remember the most that you taught me, of everything, the thing that really has stayed in my head is allow the reader to work things out themselves. Trust your reader to be cleverer than you currently are. And it's a mistake so many writers read. And I now see it when I read other work. I can see when a writer hasn't had the confidence, really.
It is about confidence.
It is about confidence.
Absolutely.
And you kept saying that to me.
Yeah.
And it took me a long time to understand it was my lack of confidence in my writing that meant I was feeling I had to tell it again and again and not trust the reader.
Yeah, I think when you've got somebody kind of holding your hand and you start to gain that confidence, and you certainly, I mean, I watched your confidence grow, which was one of the great things about mentoring, is that you see in front of you the results, which is lovely.
And from my side, I saw it too. It was very satisfying when I could go through the manuscript myself and go, nope, I can trust my reader there. That was such a good feeling.
Or presumably at some point Sarah felt that you were ready to submit the novel to agents. Can you talk a bit about that process, which I know is very nerve-wracking for writers?
It really is nerve-wracking. And yes, I was guided by you to a large extent. I would really guard against people submitting to agents to test the water. You need to be certain that you've done as much as you can do and polished your submission to within an inch of its life before you send it out. And that path was a very wiggly path. I had some cul-de-sacs and some dead ends and some backwards and forwards, and there's a lot of waiting and there's an awful lot of rejection. You know, I started this whole thing thinking I was going to be this role model to my children, become an author at the age of whatever I was at the time, a while ago now. And instead, I was a role model for picking myself up off the floor and dusting myself off and phoning Sarah and saying, no, you know, the answer's no. And some of it was that I hadn't submitted it to the right person. But sometimes I got feedback that made me think, okay, maybe I wasn't quite ready and needed to go back to the drawing board. And then Sarah and I would carry on working for a bit with new information about the book. And then eventually you get to a place where you don't know, again, it's a bit like inspiration, you don't know it definitively until it's retrospective, where it really is ready. And then you can feel that, because
It's
suddenly the responses are very, very different.
Yeah.
How did you know that Charlotte Seymour, your agent at Johnson and Alcock, was the one for you?
Mainly because she loved the book. She read it straight through in one day, and I thought that was a really good sign. She said she couldn't put it down. And I think that's the most important thing. Your agent has to really love it. They have to have finished it, because I think sometimes you'll get offered representation when agents haven't finished your work. And I think sometimes that works out. But if they've finished it and they've raced through it and they seem passionate about it, then you're onto a good thing. And I liked what Charlotte had to say about it. There were a few questions she had, and they were, again, a bit like your feedback, they really resonated with me. She very, very quickly felt like 100% the right person.
Sarah, Kara obviously had a good outcome with her novel. As a mentor, is it the expectations that your mentees can expect you to introduce them to an agent once the mentorship has been completed?
Some writers are very happy just to go to a small publisher, and I might guide them towards that. It really depends on the individual and what the book itself. Because we work with a kind of collection of agencies, and if we feel that something fits, it's a bit like a dating agency really. If we feel it fits and it would work with a particular agent that we're in contact with, then we'll guide them. But it has to be of a certain standard, and it has to be right for those agents. And we only work with a small stable of agents. So it was just, it really depends.
When you met Charlotte initially, did you discuss with her who she was going to submit the book to?
It's a really important part of the agent discussion, actually. You and I spent a lot of time talking about where the book fitted into the market.
Yeah.
And you have to have a clear idea in your own head of what you're trying to sell, because you then got to sell it in your submission letter. So your idea of what your book is has to be quite clear. And I think that one of the important things about the agent is that their idea of where the book fits in has to match yours. So I think in the very first conversation with Charlotte, I spoke to her about how she would submit it, how she would frame it, and the kinds of publishers that she would submit it to. And I think what was so lovely when I met her was that she'd already thought about all of that. I think that a good agent response is, I really love this book, and I can see how I can sell it straight away.
So Kara, when you got the Pan Macmillan publishing deal, how did you feel?
It felt slightly surreal. I was with 4 girlfriends, and one of them had her own book published, so she sort of got it, and the others said, gosh, that's fantastic, I'm starving, when's lunch? So the person I really wanted to tell was Sarah, and that's because by then you really are going down this road together. I had Sarah holding my hand very much in real time. By then it's a proper partnership, and it was fantastic for that.
Yeah, I think the thing about mentoring is that you take that book, your book, I took it to bed with me. Every night it was in my head. I lived with it in the same, and those characters, I know those characters so well.
You did. You knew every line. It used to absolutely amaze me how Sarah would be able to say, when Art says this, or when Mimi says that, and it would be chapters earlier, and she would know exactly where it fitted in at that time. It was absolutely incredible.
Sarah, what was your reaction when you learnt about the deal with Pan Macmillan?
I cried.
You did. We both cried.
We did. Yeah,
cried.
It was the best thing. I think it was the same as getting my own book published, but better.
It was very exciting.
Kara, once Charlotte sent your book out for submission, I gather you had several offers. What made you very keen on Pan Macmillan?
I trusted Charlotte's advice, and she gave me very firm, very clear advice during that whole process. I had interest from other publishers, but Pan Macmillan came in with the preempt quite quickly. We had a very, very nice meeting, and I liked the editor there enormously. She got the book in its entirety, all the different aspects of it, she seemed to understand. So we felt very aligned. And I had always been told, don't preempt terrible things, don't take preempts. And Charlotte said to me, you've struck gold here. You're not going to find another editor who sees your novel as clearly as the Pan Mac team do. The whole team is behind it. They'd done this amazing presentation where everybody had come to the table and said what their relationship with maths was when they were at school. It was a whole team. And Charlotte said to me, go for it. This is fantastic. It's a good offer. Don't hesitate. And I'm so glad I didn't.